Hi, I'm Stefan, also known as Moodsoup. I'm a generative artist. I live and work in Antwerp, Belgium, and I'd like to tell you a little bit more about myself and my upcoming collection Mutual on GEN.ART. In high school, I had a scientific education, but by the end of high school, I was really fed up with it because there was a lot of theory and it was not shown to us how this could be applied to the real world. So after high school, I really wanted to do something creative and with my hands. That's when I decided to study graphic design. So I graduated studying graphic design by the end of the 90s. Those were the early days of the internet and I was really fascinated by this new technology and also by Flash, if you still remember that. That was a tool that allowed you to build interactive experiences and animation. And that reminded me of the things I was playing with as a boy, like the Lego Technics. And in a sense, you could make your own bricks now and build functional systems and machines. But Flash was gone within 1 year when the iPhone and the iPad arrived. And I felt a bit of a void for my creativity and I needed to find a new outlet. So after a while, I discovered processing and later on P5. And I tried to apply those in my web design and web development work. And by the early 2020s, 21, I started experimenting with NFTs and researching those. And at the start of this year, 22, I decided to go full in and become a full-time generative artist. I noticed that a lot of my inspiration comes from my childhood and my teenage years. For example, I liked to watch a lot of movies like science fiction and fantasy, like Star Wars, Alien, The Thing, and there was this strange mixture in these movies, a repulsion and an attraction at the same time. But more than the movies itself, I was very fascinated by the special effects and I wanted to know how this was made. And that's where this mixture of design and engineering comes into play. And I wanted to emulate that and try it myself. So I played a lot with Lego Technics bricks in my own limited and crappy way. And another thing that influenced me a lot was the music by Pixies. I think I was about 14 or 16 years old when I heard the first song. Up until then I was listening to the Top 40 and Dire Straits, and then came along Frank Black with his Primal Scream, who totally blew me away and showed me that this was also possible. And apart from the music, they also managed to create a whole universe with the artwork and something weird and wonderful. And that's something that I also found later on in the electronic music by Flying Lotus. Mutual explores the concept of duality versus non-duality. A while ago I started making plotted artworks, and by making very small changes to the original code, I got really different visual outputs. I like this a lot and this gave rise to a series of triptychs. And I also got the idea to make a long-form series based on this, and that's when I started to make Mutual. So I have this basic code that is like the underlying invisible field. And by making very small changes, you get very different visual representations of this same code. So you get like these different manifestations from a same fundamental substrate. Mutual consists of 3 different visual states: the ordered state, the excited state, and the interaction state. So every time you mint a piece, you can generate all these 3 states. The first one is the ordered, and the subdivision grid produces a lot of straight lines and very rigid shapes. There is some contrast in there, but this gives an architectural feel, and the ratio and the mind is in control in this state. This hints at an aerial view of an urban landscape or a very structured network. The second state is the excited state, and this is the state where the rigid lines start to loosen and the rigidity of the grid really starts to dissolve. So you get this bendy warping shapes. Sometimes they can be mild, and sometimes they can form these really chaotic patterns. This is the state where the mind starts to dissolve also, and emotion, and even more so intuition and instinct take over, and they shape this organically fragmented canvas. The third state is the interaction state, and this is the place where the previous two meet each other, so the ordered and the excited. Rather than to compete with each other, they work together, and much like two parts of a brain, they collaborate instead of being opposites. They reach a certain equilibrium that's either stable and well balanced, or can be on the verge of reverting back to one of the previous appearances. So they mutually occupy a collective space. The geometric foundation of this piece is subdivision. So how can this best be visualized? Picture yourself a sandbox like this, and you have a bag of pebbles. And you take a pebble and you throw it at a random position inside this box. Say it lands over here. So you decide whether to draw a horizontal or a vertical line at this position, and now the big box is subdivided into two smaller boxes. And then we repeat this process over and over. So if I take my second pebble and I throw it in the box on the bottom, it gets subdivided again, and so we get a lot more smaller and smaller boxes. So if I show you in an example, you can see that we have a lot more density on the upper left than on the bottom part of the image. This means that we have thrown a lot of pebbles in this part, and by controlling where to throw them, in which order, and whether to draw vertical or horizontal lines, we can control the visual output. I'll show you one more example. And this is more or less the opposite of the previous one. So you can see that we have a lot of density in the bottom part of the image and less in the upper part. Another technique I use is what I call light maps. These are essentially black and white canvases, and I draw some very basic geometric shapes or gradients onto them. Later on, I can sample the brightness values of this light map at certain points and use these values to drive other processes in the algorithm. For example, in this one, I have drawn a black background and a white circle on top. And this drives which boxes can be seen and which one are hidden in this design. I like it a lot because it gives immediate visual feedback, and I can also easily manipulate values like putting a little bit of blur onto the light map, invert it, and so on. So we have these three states: the ordered, the excited, and the interaction. And each state is rendered on screen by means of an organic animation. This visualizes the bubbling up from the underlying shared structure, and you can cycle through them by clicking or by a certain key combination. There are about 12 color palettes. This provides a nice variation while maintaining a consistency across the collection. For example, this one is called Clear Skies, and it uses a sampled image for the colors. This one is called Brick is Red, and it uses a more predetermined and limited color palettes. Some of the palettes also use an accent color. In this case, this is the blue squares in the design. To most of the backgrounds, I applied a grainy texture based on noise values. This provides for a more tactile, less sterile feeling of the image. By minting an edition of Mutual, you can generate a triptych of these three individual but complementary designs. With a certain key combination or a click, you can cycle through them, and with another key combination, you can export a high-resolution file for printing. I still have lots of inspiration, so I will keep making generative art and building connections. You can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Mastodon. I'm very thankful for your support, and hopefully we can meet in the future. I look forward to it.